Located at 3733 East Broadway, this is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, which we just heard from Doug Martin, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show, and a host of others. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today, so we can be enlightened by cats who are normally working things out and communicating in a language on the bandstand musically. It is a high honor to bring in one of the most decorated studio musicians and leaders of all time, really. He's been going at this thing at least 5 decades now. John Tropea, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
How you doing, Jake?
How you
Thanks
doing?
for having me.
Hey, man, nice to hear you, Matt. Nice to hear you.
Same here. Same here.
You know, I wanted to start by asking you about if you could talk to the audience early on in your playing career, even before you were necessarily had a multitude of gigs. If you could talk about playing in an unamplified setting where maybe the upright bass was unamplified and it really helped your ears grow to be able to hear all the instruments. What I'm getting at is the idea now we are living in this huge amplified situation, huge subwoofers, double bass drums. I can't most of the time even pick out a lot of the music. And for you guys in your generation, you guys were on the bandstand and things were not amplified all the time. And I wanted you to talk about an early time in your career when that played out and your ears grew from it.
Well, yeah, I mean, right, you know, I'm a pretty old man here. I started out playing guitar at 12 years old, and you know, the only thing that really was amplified in my first couple of bands was my guitar, and they weren't very big amps. You know, the first band I think was accordion, guitar, drums, and saxophone. And but more importantly, when I went to college of music, when I went to Berklee School of Music, there was nothing amplified. Everything was, except for the guitar, of course. It was usually 4 trumpets, 3 trumpets, 4 trumpets, 3 bones or 4 bones, or 5 saxophones, piano, bass, and drums, and a guitar. And the guitar was like started to be added into that scene as an electric guitar in the in the 60s. So guys like me, we heard all the instruments. Learning to write, orchestrate, we were really, it was a first-hand, front seat with that sound hitting you right in the face. So it was an education. Nowadays you're using computers and stuff. It's synthesized horns. Although I don't do that with my band. My band's totally live. But
you try to keep it. I mean, I guess the other thing. I just want to be clear. The electric guitar in a jazz context, were you, when you said you were the only amplified instrument, were you talking about using an acoustic guitar and then you transitioned to an electric, or was your electric guitar the amplified at that time?
No, it was always amplified, unless I was playing with a big band and playing Freddie Green type of F-hole guitar. But then yeah. You know, that's not amplified. Freddie used to cut through 20-piece orchestra. You kind of felt it.
Yeah, well, it's funny you bring that up because I was interviewing Perla on the show last week, and he brought up seeing Freddie Green with Count Basie, and he said that the drummer was following the rhythm patterns of Freddie Green. So I find it really it's unbelievable that you just dropped that name. I guess what I'm trying to get at also is this idea of I've interviewed John Abercrombie, Kenny Burrell. I mean, Pat Martino, I've done about 5 interviews with, and now I get a chance to talk to you, and it's just it's so great because I love talking to you cats about the idea of drummers who were really not using the bass drums as timekeepers at all, that they were dancing on the cymbals. Oftentimes they'd keep time on the cymbals, and they'd use the bass drum maybe for rebound or a little bit of taste, but the upper portion of the trap set was being used. And I was hoping you could talk about, especially those R&B bands. You mentioned those frontline horn bands that you were talking about, four trumpets, bones, when you were at Berklee. Can you talk about some of the drummers that you really enjoyed to play with because of the fact that they were not overly reliant on the bass drum to keep time?
Well, I'm not so sure I understand what you mean by not being relying on bass drums and keeping time. I mean, R&B is very heavily they rely on the bass drum. The bass drum is definitely a part of the whole kit. If you want to go before that, from the time of Gene Krupa to Buddy Rich, that to me, and if I'm understanding you correctly, that to me is more of what you're talking about.
I think you're right. No, you're absolutely. I'm talking about Kenny Clark, Max Roach, and then a lot of cats that fell below the not so necessarily luminary cats, but guys that weren't. Today there are double bass drums, and that's the only thing cats use to keep time with. The upper portion of the trap set was very involved. I was born in '78, but if you listen back, to the '50s and '60s when you were coming up, I mean, those cats were dancing on the cymbals. And, Mike Mainieri said he spent a 3-day trip out in Chicago with Buddy Rich. And Buddy didn't, I don't think Buddy played the bass drum for 3 days, he said. He just played time on the cymbals the whole time. I just wanted you to talk about that.
Well, it was just a sign of the times. I mean, one time I saw Buddy Rich open a show. He came out at Carnegie Hall, and he played only cymbals for 15 minutes. Just cymbals.
I love it.
And you really heard a musical instrument there. It was unbelievable to me. And at that point, I was already a studio musician. The drummers of those days, really, you could hear the song they were playing when they soloed. Not that you can't hear it now with guys today. Guys like Gadd. He's the same quality of those days back in the 50s. Are you still there?
I'm just taking it all. Well, what I want to get at is you say they were playing the song. You're telling me they were playing melodies, right? I mean, you could really feel the melodies from the cymbal work.
You could feel them. It's so funny that I'm talking about Gadd. As soon as I hit the Gadd's name, Gadd is calling me at the same time.
And no, because Gadd is up in Phoenix, and I've been trying to get a couple calls. I've done 2 interviews with. I love it. Now, there's no coincidences in life. Okay, so just continue on.
No, I know. I believe it's so funny. He's coming to Japan with my band in May and June.
I love it.
And
can you talk specifically about what Steve does as it relates? Because I have a quote here that I just want you to talk about Steve's feel, because what he said was, he goes, all the drummers that I grew up with were playing on the cymbals, and I'll get the quote up here, but I'd just like you to talk about. I mean, ultimately he's going to Japan with you, but what do you like most about Gadd's time feel, and obviously him playing the song on the trap set?
Well, it's all of the above. I mean, he first of all, he's very judicious. He doesn't overplay at all. If anything, he underplays. And I mean, we did a tune. We did Giant Steps on my 2 albums back, and it was a very low key Giant Steps. It was fast, but it was low keyed, and he played mostly Russians on the thing. So I said to him, I said, Steve, you can hit the cymbal once in a while if you want. I don't want to tell you what to play because I love the way he plays. He was playing so light, and at just about the last 30 seconds, he hit the hi-hat cymbal once, and it was too much level because he's so finesseful, and that's one of the things about him.
Yeah.
But when he hits the drums, I mean, a lot of the stuff I do is very light, but then all of a sudden it gets very heavy. And when he hits the drums, he's as hard as anybody else. He's just a very judicious drummer, and we feel the same rhythms together. We came from the same time. We grew up around the same. We developed at the same time, as did a bunch of my friends that I'm still playing with. Lou Marini, Steve, Will Lee.
Are you still playing with Bones, by the way?
I'm actually playing with Bones. Next March 21st to the 27th in Germany. He's playing with the Blues Brothers. I play with the Blues.
Yeah,
Brothers.
I know. I noticed that, and because Bones and I did an epic interview. He was, coming straight out of Mississippi, I think it was. He was he's on the Chitlin circuit down there. To me, you guys are the frontline leaders in our society, and you improvise and you communicate in the musical language, but you guys are so brilliant, so team oriented, huge ears. This is what Gadd said to me in our second interview. He said, "I grew up listening to jazz before I was into R&B. Guys who I listened to when I first started out were using cymbals all the time." And then this is kind of going to your point here. He goes, "I use cymbals depending on the kind of music I'm playing. If it's more of a funk,
Right.
If it's more of a funk thing, it might be more of a closed hi-hat. If it's jazz or straight ahead time, I go to the ride cymbal. A lot of guys of the bebop era were diehard bebop fans, and they didn't like other kinds of music. For one reason or
Right.
another, I was inspired by other kinds of music, groove music, because I love different grooves. I started out playing jazz, and I loved all that, but I was challenged by a simpler kind of music." And then this is the pithy line. He goes, "Simple isn't as simple as you think." And
That's right.
And I want
That's
you to riff on this, because when I talked to Abercrombie a while back, he had his first gig was with Johnny Hammond Smith, and he basically said, he goes, if you didn't have rhythm as a guitar player, you couldn't get a gig. And I want you to talk.
Right.
And can you talk about the importance of rhythm? You can talk about, and we'll get into this later, about people wanking it for 15 or 20 minutes on a solo, a lead solo guitar, but just the idea of rhythm. I just want Tropea's the importance of rhythm as a guitar player within an improvisational unit.
It's more important than anything else to me. Playing rhythm is, first of all, I'm the most comfortable playing the rhythm. And second of all, I play rhythm not so much in patterns, but I play rhythm in patterns as a drummer would play it. If you listen to the way I play rhythm, you hear the bass drum on the low strings, and you hear the accents on the higher strings. And I play patterns too. When I was doing R&B dates, sometimes you have to play chicks and you have to play certain patterns. But when I solo, like if I break it down between me and the bass player or me and the drummer, I'm basically playing a drum solo with the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And the tonality is maybe secondary to that, in my mind. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
It doesn't. No, we're riffing here, and I just think, where do you think you had your best experience? Obviously you started when you were 12, but could you point to Berklee as a time when on the bandstand when you really developed your rhythm chops and got in sync with a drummer?
I developed rhythm from a very early age, but I really developed it when I went to Berklee School of Music in '64. I got up there and I was thrown. One of my colleagues was John Abercrombie. We played a lot together.
I love it.
And in those days up in Boston, there was a lot of organ trios. I played with an organ group called Bobby Duke and the Counts, and the 3 Degrees had an organ trio backing them up. And my group had a B3 with no bass player. So that's when I really developed R&B comping and jazz comping, rhythm playing. That's when it really took off for me.
Let's go deeper on your organ trio. So the Cat was kicking pedals on the B3, is that right?
Yeah. Most of the time that I played at Berklee was a left-hand bass B3.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that rhythm you were able to sync with the drummer, and there was no electric bass player at that time. But I mean, when can you talk about an experience on the bandstand that when it kind of clicked for you rhythmically?
Well, it wasn't so much the drummer, by the way. I love playing with drums because drums. The first thing in my mind comes is drums, but really syncing up with the left and right hand of the organ, the way the organ plays. Jimmy Smith, Jack McDuff. I went to see Jack McDuff my first 2 months I was at Berklee, and that's when I first met George Benson. He was 18 years old, and he was a fantastic soloist, and he plays great rhythm too. But I noticed that the way Jack McDuff played rhythm, that's what started me thinking about, organ trio rhythm guitar players, other than like Freddie Green, that kind of comping, and that's where I really took off. And I started my own group with a trio, with actually a quintet, but left-hand bass.
Who was the organ player?
There's a cat by the name of Bob Hatch.
Is he still around?
Seen him in years. I don't know. I don't. He came from New Hampshire. He lived in around the school, Berklee School of Music. He didn't go to school with me though, but he was a good player. And I played with Lonnie Smith, Dr. Lonnie Smith. He's great.
Oh my! I've interviewed him twice too. I am infatuated. You came up at this time, John, where it's like, okay, so there was this transition, obviously, from acoustic to electric instrumentation, and also, just the organ coming out of the church, out of the gospel setting, into the blues and jazz clubs. But who was the best organ player that actually was not using his left hand for bass, but actually was kicking pedals and keeping the bass?
Who was the best?
That you played with?
Lonnie Smith. Dr. Lonnie Smith.
So did McDuff and those cats?
I didn't play with McDuff. Let me clarify that.
Oh, I know that.
I was very influenced by McDuff. I mean, he showed me how to rewire my Hammond. I bought a Hammond when I was at Berklee too. But I did play with Dr. Lonnie Smith, and I played with Jimmy Smith. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Jack McDuff, he was the granddaddy. It's like, to me, in my mind, between him and Lonnie Smith. And Lonnie Smith's still around. They're a dying breed, man. He sends chills up and down my spine when I played with him.
I love it. What about, because this is I had it. Benson came here for the Jazz Fest in January, 3rd annual in Tucson, and he was talking about basically he was a singer. I mean, I think you're right. I think he's a very good soloist. I think he's an amazing rhythm player, and he's a great singer. But he said he got humbled in a big way when he went up to see Pat Martino play with Willis Jackson. Did you get a chance to see Pat with Willis?
Oh yeah, when Benson left when Benson left Jack McDuff, Pat Martino took over.
That's right.
And then I used to go to see him on Lenny's on the Turnpike when he would pass through town with McDuff. So I was influenced by both of them. Pat Martino's a bad man too. He's a bad guitar player. He's just one of the top. But what's funny to me is George Benson saying he was humbled when he sees Pat Martino, and George is aware of every guitar player. He's a very studious guitarist, but he's also one of the best in the world, in my opinion, especially soloing. And so is Pat Martino. It's like the best of the best being humbled by each other, and that's the way we were in the studios too. All the guitar players that I played with, there was nobody with a big head. We were just sitting around, happy to be there, getting things from each other on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, it's Joe Beck, it's John Tropea. I mean, the list goes. Hugh McCracken. The list goes on and on and on and on and on, and there's just so much spinning around. We have a game on this program, John, called Name That Voice. I want you to listen to this voice. I also want you to listen to what he's talking about, and then we'll come back and break it down, okay?
Okay.
Began in looping, where they would, just sit and basically, get high.
Yeah, no, I just exactly.
Sit there and we'd play a gig, and they'd record it, and Jeremy sometimes would come, Jeremy Steig, but often not. It would just be Warren and Donald up at his house in the Bronx, and they'd sit there for hours. I mean, like days, and just going through tapes of gigs that we had done, that we had recorded, and I'd fall by, and we'd all participate, and sort of we just cut up these tapes and say, yeah, this could work with this could work with that, and most of it was sort of like helter skelter, but it turned out they turned out to be very interesting loops, and while we were playing, Jeremy was, a fantastic artist, and cartoonist.
Oh yeah, well his dad lived on his dad's books too.
So he, while we play, he'd have this sort of a coloring sheet, and as we were playing, he'd be drawing, and slowly these beautiful drawings of his would just appear, on a screen, like a silk screen, and they just would move up as we play, and so we were experimenting early on. I mean, it's when I basically used pickups on the bars of my vibraphone so that I could go through wah-wah pedals.
Well, you just gave it away. It's Mike Maneri.
I'm so bummed that was. Did you know it before he said that or no?
No, I knew it was Mike, but
I know. My engineer. We brought it down too late. So yeah, that was Maneri.
It sounds like Harry with a cold, though.
He might have been. I think he was suffering. No, you know what's funny? Your ears are incredible because I think he was coming off of a serious flu, so he was a little under the weather. You're on fire.
Yeah, he sounds deeper than Mike is a little higher voice than that normally.
Well, we that was only 10 minutes into our hour-long trip. So what I'm getting at is I want to know about the experimentation from Tropea as it relates to musique concrète, looping, and also the kind of organic creation of music. As far as I'm concerned, that's why the vocabulary of music was growing so incredibly strong. Obviously, there was a live touring circuit, but you guys as a community, I mean, he was talking about Warren Bernhardt, another legendary studio cat, Donald McDonald, and then Jeremy Steig not even playing, just showing up with like doing what would be considered in today's world a laser light show, but with painting. And I just wanted you to, if you could talk a little bit about, experience you had with some of your brothers and sisters, either when you moved to New York or in Boston, or that organic creation where it really wasn't about perfection or being super tight, but it was more about coming up with new stuff.
Yeah, there was also, it was that, and there was playing with guys that was exceptionally great groove players, and like Purdy and Steve. It wasn't that it was perfect, but they played pretty perfectly. And coming from playing live in Boston, and even before that, when I was in high school, I always wanted to be a studio musician, but I didn't play in the studio that much before I went to Berklee. When I got to Berklee, I honed more my live playing R&B. When I got to New York, that's when I really sat looking at Bernard Purdy, a whole host of Herbie Lavelle, a whole host of funky drummers and bass players. Jerry Jamott,
Russell George. Russell George.
Those cats.
Oh man,
those cats were guys. They didn't learn how to play from a computer.
Right.
They learned how to play by playing, and that's not that there's not guys today. There are great guys, young guys that are still doing it that way. But there was, when I went to Berklee, the extent of high tech was we had a room of electric pianos, Fender Rhodes pianos, and the high tech, the epitome of high tech is everybody had headphones. That was it.
I love it.
So now,
yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah.
Another animal, But that's what developed everybody. Everybody got better by playing with great players. Whatever I lacked as a guitarist, or I felt like I got more meticulous in the studio because I was playing next to guys that had done it long before I did, like Tony Mottola, Vinnie Bell, McCracken was there before me.
Everett Barksdale?
Barksdale, I love Barksdale.
Barksdale could play like. How do you account for the fact that these cats? This is really important, John, and maybe self-evident to you because you grew up in that time. But for my generation, as a Gen Xer, the millennials, and as we move forward, my whole show for 6 years has been dedicated to building a bridge to future understanding of music. How did those cats? Because they were human beings, and like you said Gadd, Purdy, Lavelle, they were close to perfect. How is having a funky, near-perfect human being drummer allow for the elasticity or vocabulary of music to grow?
Well, it grew by virtue of the fact that you weren't fighting anything that was not good. You weren't fighting a guy who was playing with bad time. You were listening to somebody play well, so you reacted to that, and then the music went where it went. Because it went further because there was nothing to hold it back. There was no flat tire to slow the car. You know what I mean? Everything was like, wow, that's the shit. I sat next to the guitarist, the first guitarist I played with in the studio at 12 years old. The Black Cat played great chicks. It wasn't Jimmy Spruill. It wasn't Everett Barksdale.
I really need to know this name. I need your memory to come back at some point on this one.
I know. Hey, I'm getting.
No, I know. You were 12 years old, but still, talk about he was in the pocket.
It was in the pocket. This guy played 2 and 4 chicks, and he was the best in New York at doing it. And I sat with him for like 2 hours one afternoon because I was a kid. He loved me. He saw I had some promise as a guitarist, and he said, son, let me show you how to do this. You cup your hand and make believe you're playing 2 and 4 on the snare. And when you come down on the strings, you mute it with the back of your hand, with the palm of your hand. And I got it. I got it that day. I got it right there that day. And that it's like $1 million lesson. Whole career. Oh. Anytime I had to play, I was confident. Because I learned it from the best guy. And I can't remember his name.
No, so you were. Can you talk about so you had I talked.
His name is Carl Lynch.
Say again.
Carl Lynch.
Lynch.
L-Y-N-T.
And you said that he taught you chicks, 2 and 4 chicks. What is that? Is that it? Is that what you said?
Well, he played a lot of stuff on the guitar. He was an R&B guitar player. But like playing 2 and 4 on a snare.
Sure.
Sometimes the guitar will do that many times. But he had such a snap in the way he did it. You just didn't do 2 and 4. You made a sound out of it, and he was the best at it. I mean, ask Spinoza if Huey was around, he'd say the same thing. I'm sure Huey learned it from him too, because Huey was about 4 years before me, and that's when Carl was the 60s and the 50s. He played a lot with Gary Chester Sr., guys like that, and Bucky Pizzarelli, guys like that.
Absolutely. Well, no, I mean, I would like to know. I mean, when you were in the studio at 12, if you were doing jingles or you were doing game shows or cutting studio sessions, were you able to go out at night and get stuff out of your system on the bandstand, or were you going to the peanut gallery and watching cats?
No, I think I misled you. My first day in the studio was not as a studio musician. I think I may have been 12 or maybe even 13. I was in the studio because I wrote a song, and my father and a guy helped me get musicians, and I was basically the artist. I wasn't really. I didn't do studio work until I got to Boston when I was 18.
What studio did you cut stuff in studios in Boston, or you would go to New York?
Well, what when I went to Boston, it was 64 to 67, no, 60, 67. And there was a studio up there called...
I'm stretching you out today. I know. Yeah.
And I had the name right in my head.
It's all right. It'll come back.
And when I say I did studio work, I didn't do that much. I maybe 1 or 2 a month. Guys knew I could read, and I knew about production and stuff. So it was right in back of the Coconut Grove, right in that little space. There was a studio there, but I really didn't do studio work until I came back to New York. That's when I started taking off doing that.
Yeah, no, I'm looking here. Again, this is not always the most accurate source, but All Music has you on Zulema. Did you do any, or Ronnie Foster, Roberta Flack? These are all R&B kind of 72. Because when I've interviewed Dick Burke, rest in peace, Gene Perla, Mark Levine, Harvey Mason, Ernie Watts, now I get Tropea. You guys were like one of the first generations to go to Berklee. Now, Levine and Perla and Don Elias were in this Latin salsa band. Now, you were in with the 3 Degrees playing rhythm. And how did you wind up connecting with the rhythm and blues cats? I mean, this to me is absolutely fascinating, essential.
Well, when I first got up to Boston, I knew a lot of songs. I knew the James Brown stuff. I knew bassy stuff too, but I was actually gigging with the teachers when they found that I knew all the tunes.
Like Santisi, you were Santisi and stuff like that.
I didn't gig that much with Santisi, but I did gigs with who's the guy that did the Tijuana Brass up there? He had a Tijuana Brass band.
Well, obviously it's not Herb. You're not talking about Herb, are you?
Well, I studied with Herb. I might have done 1 or 2 gigs with Herb, but there was another trumpet player I did more stuff with, and there was a bass player that I did more stuff with, upright bass player that did more society gigs. That's
continue. I'm just trying to find out about I know Jazz Workshop. Lenny's on the Turnpike. The combat zone. I don't know if that was in effect in the '60s, but where were the R&B clubs where you were getting your R&B chops?
It was R&B club was Intermission Lounge on Washington. It was a Bucket of Blood. There was the one. There were 2 clubs in Revere Beach that I played.
Sure.
The Blue Mirror was an R&B club. I played R&B for 3 years while I was in Boston. The second year in Boston is when I got the gig with the 3 Degrees. And the first year I played with a group called Bobby Duke and the Counts, which was an organ trio, and he was a front man. So I played R&B from the minute I got up there. I'm learning how to write jazz and orchestrate jazz and play jazz guitar at the school, but I'm playing R&B at night, sometimes 7 nights a week and 2 matinees. That was really my development. That's where I heard Purdy. I heard Purdy when he had his Funky Donkey record. We went to see him. I learned every one of his songs and played them in my band. Then when I came back to New York in 1968, I met Purdy with a friend that knew him. And he said, "Let me introduce you to Purdy." So Purdy says to me, "You play guitar, man. You want to do a gig?" I said, "Yeah, of course." And so he says, "Okay, here it is. Here's the address. Meet me there Saturday at 2:00. It was a high school in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Hubert Laws was on it. Jerry Jermott was on it. I forget. It was like a 4-horn band.
Oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, my God.
Continue. He hands me the book. On the top of the book, it says, Pretty Purdy, Funky Donkey. I opened the book up, and we proceed to play for high school kids. And Purdy's looking at me, and he's like, kept on looking at me, and I'm playing every song. I never turned a page on the book.
You'd already memorized it. Yeah, you knew them all.
And from that day on, I worked with Purdy I worked hundreds of gigs with Purdy. Well, maybe not hundreds. That's an exaggeration. But I met Richard T. through Purdy. I wound up playing with his band till the day he died. and I met Gordon Edwards, a bunch of R&B players that I once. I played on the Hustle. Dan McCoy. I worked on a lot of gigs with Dan.
Unbelievable. This is exactly this is where the rubber meets the road for the Jake Feinberg show, because you were really, I mean, just stepping into tomorrow and today, John. What if you didn't have that kind of bandstand experience, that burning experience with Dukes and the 3 Degrees? And you were just sort of clustered into academia. I point to Kenny Burrell, because Burrell and I went around and around for about an hour, and he was very, Kenny Burrell, they were writing their own jazz charts. There were no schools. And so you went to Berklee in its infancy. It's very different now. But the point is that you had all this ability, experiential bandstand ability. Where do you think you honestly would have been if you didn't have all that live experience and you were just inside academia, as so many amazingly beautiful cats are? There's so many. We have a supply and demand issue now as well. But you specifically, what do you think would have amounted if you didn't have that experience of being 7 nights a week burning on the bandstand?
I often think of that, because I don't. You have to look at it this way. I, from the age of 12, used to take 2 tape recorders, mono tape recorders, put them next to each other, and overdub, because I knew that's sort of how Les Paul and Mary Ford did it, only they did it more in line. But I was interested in recording. I remember telling my father, I want to be the guy standing next to the artist in the studio and on stage. I don't want to be the artist. I want to be the guy next to the artist. Because I used to watch Elvis, and I used to watch Ricky Nelson, and there's the other guitar player who just died, who was the real guitar player in the group. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So now I go to Berklee, and I really hone in on playing live, but all the other things about recording. So when you get into the studio and you break into studio work as a guitarist and a rhythm section player, you kind of get in there, and you're the young kid, and there's another guitar player, maybe Tony Mottola, maybe Bucky Pizzarelli, and you're the young kid. And the reason why I got in and started getting busy, and I think this is the case with most of the cats, Eric Gale, Ewan McCracken, certainly David Spinoza, is because you're coming in there and you know the top 40 scene. You know the James Brown records. So now you're coming in with unused new ideas. And that's what they need in the studio, especially from guitar players. They need you to read. They need you to be able to play what they put in front of you. But they also need you to know something that the older guys maybe have gotten away from. You know what I'm saying?
I'd like you to keep going. No, what do you mean they've gotten away from it a little bit?
Well, when you first get into the studio, you're coming with a bag full of ideas that you learned from songs that you played live, top 40. If you're doing a jingle, the guy says, "Can you make this sound like the Beatles?" So maybe I played Beatles stuff 7 nights a week in Boston.
Right.
I knew. Oh yeah, I know that. You want something like that? The sound of the guitar on this record? Sure, we could do that. With guys that have been there for a long time, when you get busy doing studio work, you're not necessarily playing live that much. You're not necessarily learning new songs. You're just playing your craft. So I think that if I hadn't had the live experience, I might not have made it to where I got to.
I think you nailed it, and I also think that what you got. I remember my first interview. I've done about 4 interviews with Cobham so far, and Billy said that just having a deep bag of songs. James Brown, Papa's got a brand new bag, but you guys had a deep bag of songs, and so you were very flexible within the studio. And I wonder, because of the stratification of music and the genres and the you really came up before genres. I mean, there was no jazz schools were just in its infancy. I mean, this blending of music is intoxicating, but it allowed you to be able to go in and be as flexible. Someone said to you, "Can you play this, this is a little bit odd metered, or you're at a Quincy Jones session and there's Herb Ellis, I don't know, there's 4 cats there. You're finding space for each other. I mean, to me, it's I think it's very humbling for me because, somewhere along the line in our culture, in this country, we've gotten to a point where, in my mind, at 38, musicians, I remember Charlie Persip said, he goes, part of the problem is that, we're always saying, yeah, we're going to play music, man. He's like, we're not playing anything. We're not playing, playing gives the impression of, it's not a profession. It's not a profession. You don't get paid for it. And now you got this younger generation that's like pay to play or play for the door. I mean, the bottom line is those Italian bistro gigs, bagels and bongos and stuff, that put money in people's pockets like yourself. And I don't get why all of a sudden we've had this huge paradigm shift to looking at art as unquantifiable, which it is. But there should be it should be monetary. That to me is the most concerning part, is that you guys, what you do, you're masters of your craft, and you're not playing for free. And it humbles me that we've reached this point now where cats have to not just, I don't know how you're supposed to really work on your craft when you can't even put food on the table for your kids.
No, it's a big problem. It always was, but to me, it's even a bigger problem now. You can't go into a club without the club owner saying, how many people can you bring in? They're totally divorced from developing a crowd for you. Now it's what's the crowd that you bring in?
Right.
And I know a lot of young guitar players, great, wonderful players, that they didn't have the luxury that we had in the 70s of live playing. I was going to New York every day and sitting next to 5 different guitar players in 3 days. Sometimes it was 4 dates a day. I was sitting, when I first started doing dates, the dates were on, actually, first date I did was on mono, but let's cut the film till 67. They just came in with 8-track.
Right.
And sitting there, 3 guitar players, full rhythm section, 2 keyboards sometimes, strings and horns live. Now, for me, that was great because I'm coming off Berklee, and I'm seeing, wow, this is the stuff. This is what I studied at Berklee. So I immediately start writing arrangements for some people. But then at the 70s, that stopped when they came in with the 16 and 24 track. Now they were doing rhythm section, and then bring the horns and strings. So the 70s was another animal.
Well, we are marinating with John Tropea here on the Jake Feinberg Show, and I want to put a button on the early 60s because I really want to hear it from you. Talking to Jimmy Cobb before he left Train's band. Coltrane had started in that early 60s period doing very modal jazz at that time, and Jimmy Cobb said that women would stand up and start screaming and say, make him stop, make him stop. It was this, for a lot of people and journalists like myself, I hope I wouldn't have characterized it, but they called it hate music. And I really wanted to know from your point of view about if you really were able to tap into that, if you saw Train live and what that experience was like for you. And because most of the cast that I talked to thought it was just love, that he was channeling love. But I just wanted to know if you had a chance to see Train during that time, because it seemed like it got mischaracterized as he was angry or it was this angry black rage, when in fact it was more love.
Yeah, I did see Train. I saw Train 2 or 3 times. But you have to remember, when I started out in the early 60s, I was playing guitar, taking 3 lessons a week in New York, and I was really influenced by Johnny Smith and Louis Bonfa. So I wasn't really listening to that much jazz, that heavier jazz. When I went to Berklee is when I started to listen to jazz, and of course R&B was my thing. But I went to the jazz workshop and saw Coltrane. The first 3 months I was at Berklee. And I have to say, I really didn't understand it. I didn't think it was hate music, though. I said to myself, he's doing something you don't know. You better find out what he's doing. So I had to educate myself. Then I went to see him again. The second time he came about 6 months later, and I started studying modal stuff and listening to him. Ernie Watts was in my band. We had a band together.
Well, who was in that? That is so heady. Who was in that band?
It was me, Ernie Watts on tenor. I had another tenor player who I don't remember. He was a local cat.
Yeah.
Guitar, no bass, drums, and two singers. And that's when Bob Hatch was on B3.
Right.
So being around Ernie was invaluable because he played so much more jazz than I did at that time. He was an accomplished jazz player at 18. And so when I went back to see Coltrane the second time at the Jazz Workshop, I came in and really understood and appreciated that. Yeah, you're right. It was love. It had nothing to do with hate. It was so deep, and I was so happy to be able to understand it. Not that I played like that.
No, not at all. Did you? I just want to be clear. Did Watts? How did Watts help you become more understanding of that music? Would you give Ernie a lot of credit because you said the first time you went to see Train, you just did not get it.
I didn't understand the free jazz.
Right.
And at that point, I was still like, 1-6-2-5, and you're taking out chorus, and you could play free, but you're playing free on a Dorian mode. But Coltrane took that to the nth degree. You know what I'm saying? And it was absolutely free stuff. And I didn't come from free. I came from playing top 40 songs and in the when I first started playing in sock hops and little things at 13, 14 years old, we were playing out of the number 2 fake book standards. So there wasn't anything free about it. You know what I mean? It was structured music. So, and Ernie was, again, it's another example of, remember when your father and mother said to you years ago, hang around with people that are better than you, because if you don't, they'll bring you down.
Well, of course, yeah, right. I dig.
It's the same thing in music. You hang around with a guy like Ernie Watts, or anybody that we're talking about, and unless you work at it to not get better, you're going to get better. And I used to sit there and say, oh, what's he doing that I can learn? Wow, that's great. And I'd go home and I'd try to, if it was a rhythm or playing with Purdy, I would say, what's making him so special? There's a lot of great drummers, but he's got something different. And he did, of course, he did. Same thing with Steve. Same thing with Sean Belton. There's wonderful drummers, and I could name 50 of them, and they're all great. But there's drummers that come up that have something just a little bit different. Like Sean Pelton. You know Sean?
Sure. Sure.
Sean Pelton has this New Orleans thing, and he takes songs from my band, arrangements that I've done, and I played with, from Steve Gadd, Rick Marotta, and he'll take it and have a certain little twist on it that just sends chills up my spine. Same thing with when Marotta plays it. Same thing when Purdy plays it. Again, but then there are a lot of drummers that just play it great anyway. But there's a little pizzazz that comes out of certain guys, or they change up. Purdy changed the business when he came in.
No, I think you're riffing really well. We're having some telepathic stuff today. Gadd already called Tropea while we were talking about Steve Gadd. You just mentioned this cat twice. Again, we're going to go back to Name That Voice. Again, listen to the content as well, and then we'll break it down.
Okay.
Grew up together, and we were in bands together. And if I wasn't playing in Brethren or Johnny Winter or Edgar Winter's band or any of those kind of things, we were doing gigs at Mikkel's and other clubs with Spinoza and those kind of bands. And Dave, those bands we were playing at Mikkel's and stuff, there was a ton of just really great groove and improv stuff where we would play the head, somebody would write a song, and it would be Tropea or Leon Pendarvis
right.
or Spinoza would write something that was just brilliant, and we would play the head. We'd play it a couple of times, and then we'd go. It'd be Pendarvis would blow, or Spinoza would blow, or somebody would start. Will Lee would start going off and playing whatever he was doing, or Chuck Rainey, or whoever it was that was playing with us at the time, or Tony Levin, and that was. I liked that kind of stuff. And what I liked about it was that it didn't last too long. Like sometimes we'd go back to Bitches Brew, go back to Miles. Sometimes when you go and you listen to them play ahead and then do 15 minutes of crazy riffing, I'm thinking that you're saying everything you say in a minute or two. That's really, I get the conversation. I understand. That's great. Now let's hear what this guy has to say. And then that guy has to say. Give them each a minute, and then let's move on to the next song and see what they have to say there. I didn't like when songs lasted 15 minutes. Sometimes you go to Bitches Brew, you'd see Miles at Bitches Brew. They'd do, in an hour and a half, they'd do 2 tunes.
Right. No, you're nailing. All right. Well, you obviously identified the.
He never.
Yeah.
He never liked long solos. Murata.
Dude, he went off on this story about this cat in L.A. who was an accomplished studio guitarist and a great player. And the dude wanted to play live gigs with Murata. And Rick's like, that's fine, but let's cut the songs down so that in an hour we can play 20 songs instead of 3 songs. So they had these rehearsals and everything was going well and Murata was feeling great and the guitar player was cutting his solos way down and it just was going to be electric. And they get on the bandstand and the first tune they play and the guy goes off for 15, 20 minutes and Murata's yelling at him, stop. So he... John, I want you to talk to everybody around the world listening and who will eventually hear this interview. What's your philosophy on saying what you need to say and being able to stretch out, but knowing at a certain point when you're repeating themes or when it's just time that you said your piece? I mean, how did you cultivate that skill? Because as I've interviewed 700 plus cats, I've learned that it's you have to cultivate it. And I just want you to talk about it from your own perspective.
Well, look, I have had times where I played a solo in 3 choruses and felt great, and then there's times where I was still searching and I played 20 choruses. I don't do it as much anymore. I think it's part of sometimes, guys, when you're developing as a soloist, you're going to take it too far sometimes. Drummers don't like that. The best thing to do is to try to say it, to try to get your head into a point where you say what you need to say and don't make it run on. It's the difference between me explaining to you what I had for dinner last night in 5 minutes or explaining to you what I had for dinner last night in 1 minute. That's all it is. And sometimes we just keep on searching. It's very rare that if you play a 5-minute solo that it's great from top to bottom. You're not hitting the sweet spot somewhere. But that's music. And that's what's great about it. I love it both ways, I mean, there's something good about not having long solos because you can play more songs. Like when I go to Japan, we're going to play 50-minute sets, which always wind up to be an hour 10 minutes because there's 2 sets a night. So you gotta kind of cut the solos back. You got to be cognizant. You don't want to just play 2 songs or 3 songs in one set. It's just not right.
Did Murata ever get after you about playing a 15-minute solo?
Yeah, way back, when we were with Diodato, he was on the first band with me. We were at the Jazz Workshop, in fact.
Murata was on drum. I know. I see. We're going to have to pick up part 2 on. I want to know about the Brazilian stuff. But Murata was on drums with Diodato at the workshop.
Oh yeah. When I played, I don't know if I played on 2001.
Well, no, I know you played on those studio albums, but I didn't. I didn't have any idea that Murata was on that.
Oh no, when the record was a hit, we went on the road. We were on the road every weekend, going all over the country playing with Diodato, and I was, he was the drummer, A friend of mine, John Gelino, played bass, and it was the Breck brothers, four horns, Breck brothers, Joe Templey, and a trombone player from Berklee that I went to school with, Sam Burgess, and Diodato, of course. So we played. That's really when I got close to Murata, and then when I did my first album in '74, I don't know if you know it, but on the first three albums had double drummers. It was Rick Murata and Steve Gadd.
You had double. Okay. Oh my. Why are you dropping this? This is on. You had double drums at the same time, right? I mean, you playing. They were. Yeah. Tropea. That's a G, because I mean, because that was Joe Cocker with Keltner and Jim Gordon, the Dead, the Allmans. The double drums to me again is another missing link. Again, a lot of cats would say that they can. Yeah, go ahead.
I had double drums before Stuff had double drums.
Who was able to? Keltner. I've done a few interviews with Jimmy Keltner, and he talked about. He did double drum. John Clemmer had him come into the studio with Shelly Manne, and Keltner. A couple of Constant Throb is the name of the album. This is right around Tropea time in the early '70s. But he said, as a drummer, when you're playing in the double drum setting, you always feel like you have to sort of only do half of what you can do, because the other guys keep in time. How did you work that? I mean, both those guys are pretty selfless, but how did those guys work in tandem together?
If you ask Steve Gadd or you ask Murata what it was like for them to play together, as far as I'm concerned, and with all due respect to all the other guys that you're talking about, I love them all. They're great drummers. Mm-hmm. There's nobody played like Rick and Steve, and I wished I had all of the basic tracks that I used to take home after we recorded the tracks. If I had them today, I could sell them and make a educational record out of them. These guys, it wasn't that they were playing a half a set of drums. It was stereo bass drums too, 2 full sets, and they looked at each other. They'd start a film, and one would start a film, the other guy would finish the film. But nothing ever worked out. I don't know if you have ever heard my first record. If you listen to the Brat, the introduction of the Brat, or Muff or Tambourine, the fills that they did were spontaneous, and it was brilliant. And as far as I'm concerned, I've been trying to work out a deal where we could go to Japan and do a Tropea band, original Tropea band reunion. Because it still would sound great today. The music was timeless.
This is very important. So the educational tape aside, do you think that that early album, the original Tropea album, does justice to how awesome their call and response and filling was, or did it get lost in that mix?
It got lost in the mix only because to a certain extent it got lost in the mix because of the technology. We had to roll off 40 cycles because the record was a little too long, and because I had the bass drums in stereo, because I wanted everybody to know those are 2 drummers playing, and it just wasn't as punchy as if it were recorded today on CD. Now, you can get the record on CD, and I did remaster it, but if I had made the record today, it would have been a different sound. I would have really been able to punch it. We did that record on 16-track. We had to bounce down the overheads, the stereo image. So there was a lot of technical things that I couldn't. It just wound up not being as punchy. That was a very good question you just asked, because a lot of people who didn't know music said, "Something sounds funny. Is there more than one drummer on there?" the guys that my friends heard it. He said, "Wow, I love Rick and Steve playing together." They immediately knew it was 2 drummers.
Wow. Tropea, can we do set 2 before you head off overseas? We got more to do.
Oh yeah, sure. You want to set up a time?
Yeah, no, we will. I got another guest on the line, so I'll email you later, but we'll figure it out. I had such a ball with you, man. It was such a great time.
Same here, man. I had a great time talking to you. It's always good to try to put things in order, about the past.
Well, what it is. This is not about preservation. This is merely about promotion, so that my daughters and future generations understand how real holistic music is made. When you talk to Gadd, you tell him I'm coming up for coffee. We're going to hang, and because I'm in Tucson, he's in Phoenix, all right?
Okay, you got it.
Love always, man. Talk to you soon, man.
Okay, thanks, Jake.
Cheers, John.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Just another one in the books. John Tropea, legendary guitar player, and we'll be right back on the other side with a legendary saxophonist, R&B funk wizard, Bobby Spencer.